Welcome to the Secret Lives channel.
He thought he was the architect of his own double life. He thought the deleted texts, the late-night business meetings, and the second phone were a fortress no one could breach. Richard walked through his front door that Sunday morning, hungover and smelling of another woman's vanilla perfume, expecting a fight. Maybe some yelling. Maybe the cold shoulder. He didn't expect the silence. He didn't expect the echo. He didn't expect to find his life packed into cardboard boxes that weren't there, and a single manila envelope resting on the kitchen island that weighed more than the entire house. He thought he was playing a game. He didn't realize his wife had already won it, signed the scorecard, and left the building. The hangover felt like a dull, rusty saw blade grinding against the back of Richard's skull. It was 10:45 a.m. on a Sunday in mid-October. The sky over Seattle was a bruised shade of grey, threatening rain that never seemed to fall. Richard pulled his Audi Q7 into the driveway of the colonial-style home in Queen Anne he shared with Catherine. He checked his reflection in the rearview mirror, eyes bloodshot. Stubble slightly too aggressive for a late night at the office closing the merger. He rubbed his jaw, rehearsing the lie for the 100th time. The team went out for drinks after the deal sheets were signed. My phone died. I crashed on the couch in the break room. It was weak, but Catherine usually bought it. Or at least she pretended to. He opened the front door, bracing himself for the sound of the television, the smell of burnt coffee, or the aggressive clatter of pots and pans that usually signaled Catherine's passive-aggressive anger. Instead, there was nothing. Not the quiet of a sleeping house, the quiet of a tomb. "Kate," he called out. His voice sounded too loud, bouncing off the hardwood floors in a way it never had before. He walked into the living room. The oversized beige sectional was there. The TV was mounted on the wall, but the throw pillows, the teal ones she obsessed over, were gone. The photos on the mantel? Gone. The silver frames were still there, face down, but the pictures of their wedding in Napa, the photo of them in Paris, the one of them with her sister Margaret, stripped, panic, cold and sharp, pricked at his chest. He ran up the stairs, the hangover forgotten. "Catherine!" He threw open the door to the master bedroom. The closet doors were wide open. Her side, the left side, usually bursting with floral prints, silk blouses, and that endless row of shoes, was barren. Just empty hangers clattering softly in the draft from the open window. She hadn't just left. She had evacuated. He stumbled back downstairs, his breath catching in his throat. That's when he saw it. On the granite island in the kitchen, sitting precisely in the center of the space where the fruit bowl used to be. A thick manila envelope. And on top of it, her wedding ring. The 3-carat oval diamond he'd bought her 5 years ago to apologize for the first time he strayed. It sat there, dull and heavy. He ripped the envelope open. Petition for dissolution of marriage. The legal jargon was dense, but the sticky note attached to the front page was simple. It was written in her elegant, looping cursive, the same handwriting that used to write him love notes in his lunchbox. I know about Jessica. I know about the apartment on 4th Street. I know about the joint account withdrawal you made on Tuesday. I didn't want a scene, Richard. I just wanted out. Don't look for me. The house is listed as of this morning. You have 30 days. Richard stared at the paper. His knees gave out, and he slumped onto the kitchen stool. Jessica. She knew the name. She knew about the apartment he rented for storage that was actually a love nest. He pulled his phone out, his fingers trembling, and dialed Catherine. "The number you have dialed is no longer in service." He froze. He dialed again. Same message. He dialed her sister, Margaret. It rang once, twice, 3 times. Then, voicemail. You've reached Margaret. If this is a work emergency, email me. If this is Richard, don't ever call this number again, or I will file a restraining order, so fast your head will spin. Richard dropped the phone on the counter. The silence of the house rushed back in, louder than before. He wasn't just alone. He had been erased. By noon, the shock had curdled into a frantic, angry energy. Richard was a problem solver. He was a senior vice president at a logistics firm. He moved things across oceans for a living. He didn't lose people. He sat at his desk in the Home Office, which was surprisingly untouched, save for the missing photo of Catherine on the corner, and booted up his laptop. "Okay, Kate. You want to play hardball?" he muttered, cracking his knuckles. "Let's see how far you got." He logged into their joint bank account at Chase. Access denied. Incorrect username or password. He frowned. He tried again. Nothing. He called the bank's VIP line, putting on his best authoritative voice. "This is Richard Halloway. I'm locked out of my joint account with my wife, Catherine Halloway." The representative on the other end paused. The clicking of a keyboard seemed to last an eternity. "Mr. Halloway, I see here that the joint account was closed on Friday afternoon. The funds were dispersed according to the notarized separation agreement on file." "Separation agreement? I never signed a separation agreement," Richard shouted, spit flying onto his monitor. "Sir, we have a document here with your signature, notarized by a Mr. David P. Reynolds. 50% of the assets were transferred to an account under Mrs. Halloway's name, and 50% were transferred to your individual savings." Richard checked his personal savings. Indeed, the money was there. She hadn't stolen from him. She had taken exactly half, down to the cent. It was surgical. "Who the hell is David Reynolds?" Richard demanded. "He's a notary public, sir. Look, if you're claiming fraud, you need to come into the branch." Richard hung up. He didn't sign anything. But then a memory flashed. 3 weeks ago, Catherine had come to him with a stack of papers. "Refinancing documents for the beach house," she had said. "Lower interest rate, just sign here, here, and here." He had been watching a football game. He had been drunk. He had signed them without reading. "You clever," he whispered, a mix of rage and begrudging impressed horror rising in his throat. He needed to find her. He needed to know where she went. He opened the Find My app on his iPhone. They shared locations. It was a safety thing. He tapped on her icon. Location not available. Of course, she tossed the phone, or disabled it. He tried to think like her. Catherine was a creature of habit. She went to the same coffee shop, the same yoga studio, the same stylist. He drove to Salon Fefe, her stylist in downtown Seattle. He burst in, startling the receptionist. "Where is she? When is Catherine's next appointment?" The receptionist, a young girl with pink hair, looked terrified. "Mr. Halloway?" Kate cancelled everything. She called on Thursday, said she was moving out of state. She even recommended her slot to a friend. "Out of state? Where? Did she say where?" "No, she just said. She said she was going somewhere sunny, that's all." Somewhere sunny. That narrowed it down to half the globe. Richard drove back home, his mind racing. He needed a lead. He needed a crumb. He walked into the empty bedroom again. He scoured the trash cans. Empty. He checked the shredder. Empty. He went to the garage. Her car, a white Range Rover, was gone. Wait. The toll pass. The good-to-go pass on her windshield. It was linked to his credit card. He scrambled back to his computer and logged into the Department of Transportation website. He pulled up the transaction history for her tag. Friday, 2 p.m., I-5, southbound Tacoma. Friday, 5:30 p.m. I-5 southbound, Portland. Saturday, 9:00 a.m. I-5 southbound, Medford. She was driving south. California? Mexico? He felt a surge of triumph. Gotcha, he hissed. But then he looked at the last entry. Saturday, 8:45 p.m. License plate reader alert. LAX long-term parking, Lot C. She flew. She drove the car to Los Angeles, dumped it, and got on a plane. From LAX, she could be anywhere. London, Tokyo, New York. Or she could just be hiding in LA. Richard grabbed his phone and dialed Jessica. He needed to vent. He needed someone to tell him he wasn't crazy. "Hey, baby," Jessica answered, her voice raspy with sleep. "I thought you were with the wifey today. Isn't it Sacred Sunday?" "She's gone, Jess. She left. Took half the money. Cleared the house." There was a pause on the line. Richard expected sympathy. He expected shock. "Oh," Jessica said. Her tone wasn't shocked. It was guarded. Wow, that's fast." "Fast? It's insane. She knew about us, Jess. She mentioned you by name in the note." "She did?" Jessica's voice spiked an octave. "Wait, did she say how she knew?" "No, just that she knew. Why?" I have to go, Richard. My mum is calling on the other line." "Wait, Jess." Click. Richard stared at the phone. A cold knot formed in his stomach. Jessica never hung up on him. Jessica was the one who usually begged him to stay on the line. Why was she so scared? He looked around the empty kitchen. The silence was heavy, but now it felt different. It felt like the silence of a stage right before the trap door opens. He looked closely at the divorce papers again, specifically the Petitioner's Counsel section at the top. Law Offices of Reynolds, Stone and Associates. Representing petitioner, Catherine Halloway. Co-counsel, the Blackwood firm. Richard froze. The Blackwood firm. That wasn't a divorce firm. He knew that name. His company had used them once for a high-stakes corporate espionage case. They were aggressive. They were forensic. They were the kind of lawyers you hired when you wanted to destroy someone, not just divorce them. And then he saw it. A small secondary envelope taped under the kitchen island counter lip. He only saw it because he dropped his keys and bent down to pick them up. He peeled it off. It was addressed to Rick. Not Richard. Rick. He opened it. Inside was a single USB drive. He plugged it into his laptop. A single video file popped up. Play. The video opened. It was grainy footage. It looked like it was taken from inside a car. It showed Richard standing on a street corner. He was handing a thick envelope to a man in a grey hoodie. Richard stopped breathing. That was 3 months ago. That was the bribe he paid to the union rep to overlook the safety violations at the dock. If that got out, he wouldn't just lose his job. He would go to federal prison. The video cut to black. Then text appeared on the screen. "I'm not just leaving with my half, Rick. I'm leaving with your insurance policy. If you contest the divorce, if you try to find me, or if you don't sell the house and deposit my share of the equity into the account provided within 30 days. This video goes to the DOJ. Goodbye, Rick." Richard slammed the laptop shut. He wasn't the hunter anymore. He was the prey. For 3 days, Richard didn't sleep. He called in sick to work, claiming a family emergency, which, ironically, was the most honest thing he'd said in years. He paced the empty hallways of the Queen Anne house, the silence broken only by the sound of his own footsteps and the occasional rain lashing against the windows. He had hired a private investigator on Monday morning, a guy named Miller. Ex-cop, smelled like stale tobacco and cheap cologne, but he was supposed to be the best at finding people who didn't want to be found. "LAX is a black hole, Mr. Halloway," Miller had said, sitting in the living room where the teal pillows used to be. "But people make mistakes. They use a credit card for a coffee. They log into Netflix on hotel Wi-Fi. We'll find her." But by Wednesday, Miller had found nothing. Catherine had turned into a ghost. No flights under her name, no credit card hits. It was as if she had dissolved into the smog of Los Angeles. On Thursday, the doorbell rang. Richard jumped. He rushed to the door, a foolish hope sparking in his chest that maybe, just maybe, it was her. Maybe she got cold feet. Maybe she missed him. He swung the door open. It wasn't Catherine. It was two men in suits, cheap suits. They weren't police. They weren't lawyers. "Richard Holloway?" the taller one asked. He had a scar running through his eyebrow. "Yes?" "We're looking for Jessica Tate." Richard blinked. "Jessica? She doesn't live here. Why are you asking me?" "Because," the man said, stepping into the doorway, forcing Richard to take a step back. "She's missing. And the last person she spoke to on the phone was you, 4 days ago." "Missing?" Richard's heart hammered against his ribs. I spoke to her Sunday. She hung up on me. I haven't heard from her since." "She didn't show up for work on Monday," the man said. "Her apartment is cleared out. Similar to this house, actually." The man looked around the empty living room, a smirk touching his lips. "Seems like everyone is leaving town in a hurry, Mr. Holloway. Did you and your mistress plan a getaway, or did you do something to her?" "Who are you?" Richard demanded, trying to sound authoritative but failing. "We're family," the man said vaguely. "Jessica owes us money. A lot of money. And since she's gone, and you're the boyfriend who pays her rent—" "I don't pay her rent," Richard lied. The man pulled a piece of paper from his pocket. It was a bank statement, Richard's bank statement from his secret account, the one Catherine wasn't supposed to know about, the one he used to pay for Jessica's apartment. "This says otherwise." The man crumpled the paper and tossed it onto the floor. "You have 48 hours to tell us where she is, or pay her debt. $50,000. "Get off my property," Richard whispered. 48 hours, Rick." They turned and walked away. Richard slammed the door and locked it. He slid down against the wood, burying his head in his hands. Catherine knew about Jessica. That was clear. But did Catherine know Jessica? He scrambled for his phone and dialed Miller, the PI. "Miller, forget Catherine for a second. I need you to run a background check on Jessica Tate. Everything. Who she is, who she owes money to, and—" He paused, a terrible thought forming. "And check if there's any connection between Jessica Tate and Catherine Holloway. High school, college, anything." "You think they were in on it together?" Miller asked, his voice crackling over the line. "I think," Richard said, staring at the empty spot on the wall where his wedding photo used to hang, "that I've been played by the two best actresses in Seattle." Friday morning brought rain, the relentless, grey drizzle that Seattle was famous for. It matched Richard's mood perfectly. He was sitting in his car across the street from the luxury apartment complex on 4th Street, the one where he had spent countless Tuesday nights with Jessica. The one he paid for. He watched the entrance, half expecting to see her walk out with her yoga mat, laughing at something on her phone. But the building was just a building of brick and glass. Indifferent. His phone buzzed. It was Miller, the private investigator. "Holloway," Richard answered, his voice rough. "Tell me you have something. I have thugs breathing down my neck." "I've got something all right," Miller said, his tone grim. "But you're not going to like it. You sitting down?" "I'm in my car. Just say it." "Okay. So, Jessica Tate. I ran her prints, metaphorically speaking. Social security number, credit history, the works. The Jessica Tate you know doesn't exist." Richard gripped the steering wheel. "What do you mean she doesn't exist? I've been sleeping with her for 8 months. I pay her rent." The social security number on the lease application for that apartment belongs to a woman who died in 1998 in Ohio. The driver's license she used? A high-quality forgery. But I dug deeper. I ran facial recognition on some of the social media photos you sent me. Miller paused for effect. The silence stretched, tight as a wire. Her real name is Natalie Thorne. She's not a paralegal, Richard. She's an actress, small-time, does local theatre, some commercial work. But here's the kicker. 2 years ago, she was the lead in a play at the Collaborative Theatre in Fremont. So, she's an actress. What does that prove? The play, Miller said slowly. It was produced by a local arts patron, a donor who funded the entire season. Richard felt the blood drain from his face. Who was the donor? Catherine Holloway. Richard dropped the phone. It clattered onto the center console, Miller's voice still tinny and distant. "Richard, you still there?" He stared at the dashboard. Catherine. Catherine had hired her. The affair wasn't a slip-up. It wasn't Richard being charming and finding a beautiful younger woman who just got him. It was a casting call. He picked up the phone again. "Are you telling me my wife auditioned a mistress for me?" "It looks that way," Miller said. "And I found something else. I tracked Jessica's, financials. She's been receiving monthly deposits from a shell company called Nemesis LLC. The payment stopped 3 days ago. A final lump sum was deposited on Monday. 100 grand. "She paid her off," Richard whispered. "Catherine paid her to seduce me, document it, and then vanish. It's worse than that, Richard. The thugs looking for her? I asked around. They aren't loan sharks. They're fixers for a guy named Silas Vance. Sorry, Silas Vaughan. He runs an underground poker ring in Belltown. Natalie, Jessica, wasn't just acting for you. She was dating Silas before you. She stole a ledger from him. That's why they want her. She used you for the rent money, but she used your safe house to hide from them." Richard's head spun. It was a nesting doll of disasters. Catherine had hired a woman who was already in trouble. Or maybe Catherine didn't know about the mob connection. Or maybe she did. "Miller," Richard said, his voice trembling with a mix of awe and terror. "Catherine is smarter than this. If she hired a woman with mob ties, she did it on purpose. She wanted to unleash them on me when she left." "If that's true," Miller said, "your wife is terrifying. You have no idea." Richard hung up. He looked up at the apartment window, Unit 402. He had to get in there. There had to be something they left behind. He still had his key. He walked into the lobby, head down, avoiding the concierge. He took the elevator up, his heart hammering a frantic rhythm against his ribs. He unlocked the door to 402. The apartment was sterile. It looked like a hotel room after checkout. The bed was stripped. The closet was open and empty. The smell of her vanilla perfume was faint, like a ghost. He tore the place apart. He ripped the cushions off the sofa. He checked inside the toilet tank. He crawled under the bed. Nothing. He went to the kitchen. He opened the fridge. Empty, except for a bottle of expired mustard. He slammed the door shut in frustration. Then he saw it. On the magnetic whiteboard on the fridge, where Jessica used to write cute notes like, "Buy wine" or "Miss you," there was a faint impression. Someone had written something and erased it, but the marker residue remained. He squinted, tilting his head to catch the light. Flight 492. Cayman. Cayman. The Cayman Islands. Richard laughed, a dry, hysterical bark. Of course, offshore accounts. Non-extradition? Son? But as he leaned closer, he noticed something else. A small business card had been slid under the fridge, barely visible. He fished it out with his fingernails. It was a card for a storage facility in industrial Seattle. Safekeep Storage. Unit 315. On the back, in Jessica's handwriting, in case he doesn't pay. Richard stared at the card. He could be Silas, the mobster, or he could be Richard. Whatever was in that storage unit, it was leverage. Richard ran out of the apartment. He had a new destination. The drive to the industrial district took 40 minutes. Richard spent every second of it checking his rearview mirror, convinced the two men in cheap suits were following him. Paranoia had become his co-pilot. Safekeep Storage was a grim, concrete fortress surrounded by barbed wire. Richard flashed his ID at the gate. He didn't have the access code for the unit, but he was a master of bluster. "My wife, Jessica Tate, lost her key," he told the bored teenager at the front desk. "Unit 315. I'm on the authorized list." He wasn't, obviously, but he slid a $100 bill across the counter. "Check again." The kid looked at the money, then at Richard. He typed something. There's no Jessica Tate on the rental agreement. It's rented to a Richard Holloway." Richard froze. He had never rented a unit here. Catherine. She had rented it in his name. She had forged his signature. "Right," Richard said, forcing a smile. "That's me. I forgot I put it in my name." The kid handed him a temporary passcode. "You're good to go." Richard drove to row C, Unit 315. He rolled up the metal door. The unit was mostly empty. In the center sat a single cardboard box. He cut the tape. Inside were files, dozens of them. He picked up the first one. "The Union Bribe, July 2025. He opened it. Photos, bank transfer receipts, the video file on a USB drive. He picked up the second one. OSHA violations, Warehouse 4. Emails he had deleted years ago. Memos he had ordered shredded. He picked up the third. Jessica and Natalie expense report. This one was different. It was a log. August 4th, dinner at the Pink Door, $200. Paid by Richard. August 10th, lingerie, $150. Reimbursed by Catherine. September 1st, Richard confessed to the warehouse accident while drunk. Recorded on device B. Richard fell back against the corrugated metal wall, sliding down to the dusty concrete floor. It was an archive, a museum of his corruption. Catherine hadn't just been planning a divorce. She had been building a case, a federal case, and she had left it here, in a unit in his name. If the police found this, he was done. His phone rang. It was his boss, Arthur Sterling, CEO of the logistics firm. Richard stared at the screen. He cleared his throat, trying to find his VP voice. "Arthur, hello." "Richard." Arthur's voice was ice cold. "Where are you?" "I'm dealing with a family matter. I told HR. You're dealing with more than that. We just had federal agents leave the building. Richard, they had a warrant. They seized your computer and your hard drives." Richard's vision blurred. "What? On what grounds?" "Fraud, embezzlement, and bribery. They received an anonymous tip this morning. A digital dossier was emailed to the DOJ, the SEC, and to the board of directors." "Arthur, listen to me. No, you listen. You're fired. Effective immediately. Legal will be in touch about the clawback of your stock options. And Richard, don't come to the building. Security has been instructed to escort you off the premises if you set foot within 100 yards. The line went dead. Richard dropped the phone. It cracked on the concrete floor. He was fired. The feds were raiding his office. The dossier. Catherine had sent it. The 30 days warning in her note. That was a lie. A distraction to keep him scrambling while she executed the kill shot. He looked at the box of evidence in front of him. He had to burn it. He had to destroy it all. He grabbed the box and ran to his car. He threw it in the trunk. He needed to go somewhere remote, somewhere he could start a fire without being seen. He started the car As he reversed out of the unit, a black SUV blocked the end of the aisle. Richard slammed on the brakes. The two men in cheap suits got out. The taller one, the one with the scar, was holding a tire iron. "Mr. Holloway," the man called out, his voice echoing off the metal units. "Time's up. We couldn't find the girl. So we're going to have to take the payment from you." Richard panicked. He threw the Audi into reverse, tires screeching. He backed up fast, aiming for the gap between the buildings. Crash! He slammed into a bollard he hadn't seen. The rear bumper crumpled. The trunk popped open. The box of files spilled out onto the pavement. Papers fluttered in the wind like confetti. The men walked closer, not rushing. They knew he was trapped. "Look at that," the scarred man said, picking up a file labeled Silas Vaughan, Operation Cleanup. He whistled. "You have a file on our boss, too? You're a busy guy, Rick." Richard scrambled out of the car, hands raised. "That's not mine. I didn't write that. My wife planted it." The man smiled, revealing yellow teeth. "Your wife? Right. The one who called us an hour ago and told us where to find you." The world stopped. She called you?" "Yeah, nice lady. Said her husband was hoarding some sensitive information about Mr. Vaughan in a storage unit. Said we might want to come retrieve it before the feds got here." The man tapped the tire iron against his palm. "She also said you had the 50 grand you owe us." "I don't have it," Richard screamed. "She took it all." "That's unfortunate," the man said. He nodded to his partner. The second man moved forward. Richard turned to run, but there was nowhere to go. The industrial park was a maze of dead ends. Richard scrambled up the side of the chain-link fence, his Italian leather shoes slipping on the metal diamonds. He vaulted over the top, tearing his suit jacket, landing hard on the asphalt on the other side. He heard the men shouting, but the fence slowed them down. He ran. He ran until his lungs burned, until the taste of copper filled his mouth. He ran through the industrial wasteland, past warehouses and rusted trucks, until he reached the main road. He flagged down a taxi, looking like a madman. Disheveled, bleeding from a cut on his hand, suit torn. "Drive," he gasped, throwing himself into the back seat. "Where to?" the driver asked. Richard didn't have a home. He didn't have a job. He didn't have access to his money, and the police and the mob were both hunting him. "Just drive," Richard said. "Head north." He needed a safe harbor. He needed the one person who Catherine couldn't turn against him. His mother. She lived in a nursing home in Bellingham, 2 hours north. It was the only place left. He pulled out his phone. The screen was cracked, but it still worked. He had one new email. Sender, C. Holloway. Subject, checkmate. He opened it, his hands shaking so badly he nearly dropped the phone. "I saw the news about the raid on your office. It's a shame, Rick. You worked so hard for that corner office. By the way, I didn't take half the money. Look closer at the transfer documents. P.S. Don't bother going to your mother's. I moved her last week. She's in a lovely private facility in Arizona, near me. She thinks you're on a long business trip in China. I'd hate to have to tell her the truth about what her son has become." Richard stared at the phone. A guttural scream ripped from his throat, a sound of pure, animalistic despair. She had taken his mother. She had taken everything. He tapped on his banking app again. He looked at the transaction history, really looked at it this time. Transfer to Catherine Holloway Trust. Amount $150,000. Transfer to IRS tax payment. Prepayment. Amount $450,000. She hadn't taken half. She had taken her half, and she had sent his half to the IRS as a prepayment for future taxes. It was gone. It was in the government's hands. He couldn't get it back without months of bureaucracy, and since he was under investigation, they would freeze it anyway. He had $0. He was in a taxi he couldn't pay for. "Pull over," Richard rasped. "Here, this is the highway shoulder, buddy. Pull over." The taxi screeched to a halt. Richard threw the door open and stumbled out into the rain. He fell onto the muddy grass of the embankment. The rain soaked him to the bone. The cars rushed by, oblivious to the man whose life had been dismantled brick by brick. He lay there in the mud, closing his eyes. He thought about the vanilla perfume. He thought about the thrill of sneaking around. He thought about the arrogance of believing he was the smartest person in the room. And then he heard the sirens. Not one, but many. Rising in the distance, getting louder. He laughed. He lay in the mud and laughed until he choked. The sirens weren't a rescue. They were a punctuation mark. Richard didn't run when the flashing lights cut through the gloom of the highway shoulder. He stayed in the mud, the rain plastering his expensive, ruined suit to his skin. When the officers approached, guns drawn, shouting commands, he didn't raise his hands in surrender. He raised them in exhaustion. "Richard Halloway," one officer barked, kicking his legs apart. "I'm him," Richard mumbled, spitting out grit. "I'm the guy you want." The ride to the precinct was a blur of humiliation. He wasn't taken to a VIP holding area. He was thrown into the general intake with a drunk driver, vomiting in the corner, and a kid who looked no older than 18, nursing a broken nose. For 3 days, he sat there. He used his one phone call to try and reach his mother, only to be redirected to the nursing home in Arizona. "Hello?" His mother's voice was frail, confused. "Mom, it's Richard. I'm in trouble." "Oh, Richard. Catherine told me you were on a secret mission for the government in China. She said you wouldn't be able to talk for a long time. Are you safe? Is the reception bad in Beijing?" Richard squeezed his eyes shut. Catherine hadn't just moved his mother. She had constructed a narrative so airtight that Richard couldn't break it without destroying his mother's heart. "I'm safe, Mom," he lied, his voice breaking. I wanted to hear your voice. I have to go now." When he was finally pulled into an interrogation room, it wasn't the local police. It was the FBI. 2 agents, a man and a woman, sat across from him with a thick file. "You've had a busy year, Mr. Halloway," the female agent, Agent Brooks, said. She slid a photo across the metal table. It was a still frame from the video Catherine had left on the USB drive. "Bribing union officials, falsifying safety records, embezzlement." "My wife set me up," Richard croaked. "She planned this. She orchestrated the whole thing." Agent Brooks exchanged a look with her partner. "Mrs. Halloway, we've spoken to her. She came to us voluntarily 2 weeks ago. She claimed she found these files on your home computer and was terrified for her safety. She's not a co-conspirator, Richard. She's a whistleblower. And under the Whistleblower Protection Act, she's entitled to a percentage of the assets seized from your fraud." Richard felt the room spin. A percentage. "She gets paid?" he whispered. "She sends me to prison, and the government writes her a check?" "She gets a reward for exposing corporate corruption," the agent corrected. "And given the scale of your fraud, roughly $12 million over 5 years, her share is substantial. Now let's talk about Silas Vaughan." Richard laughed, a dry, rattling sound. "I don't know Silas Vaughan. My mistress knew him." "Your mistress? You mean Natalie Thorne?" The agent raised an eyebrow. "We brought her in yesterday. She claims you hired her to intimidate a competitor, and when she refused, you threatened her. She's cutting a deal, Richard. Everyone is cutting a deal, except you. You're the only one left holding the bag." The trial was a spectacle. The local news ate it up. The logistics wolf of Seattle. Richard Halloway, the man who risked dock workers' lives for a bonus. He couldn't afford a high-powered defense attorney. His assets were frozen, his cash gone to the IRS. He was stuck with a public defender, an overworked man named Gary who smelled like tuna sandwiches, and defeat. "Take the plea, Richard," Gary told him 5 minutes before the hearing. "They have the video. They have the bank records. They have the testimony of your mistress and your wife. If you go to trial, you'll get 20 years. Take the plea, and you get 8. 8 yours." Richard stared at the scuffed floor. "I'll be 53 when I get out." "You'll be alive," Gary shrugged. Richard took the plea. The sentencing was swift. The judge, a stern woman with zero patience for white-collar arrogance, looked down at him over her glasses. "Mr. Holloway, you lived a life of extraordinary privilege, and you used it to exploit others. You betrayed your workers, your shareholders, and your family. I sentence you to 8 years in Federal Correctional Institution, Sheridan." As the gavel banged, Richard turned to look at the gallery. It was mostly empty. No friends, no colleagues. They had all scattered like roaches when the lights came on. But in the back row, wearing a black trench coat and large sunglasses, sat a woman. She wasn't smiling. She wasn't crying. She was just watching. Catherine. Their eyes locked. Richard opened his mouth to scream, to curse her, to beg her. She simply raised her hand, tapped her ring finger, which was now bare, and stood up. She walked out of the courtroom without looking back. The heavy oak doors swung shut, sealing his fate. The first year of his sentence wasn't served in a cell. It was served in the corridors of his own mind. Richard spent the first 365 days waiting for the mistake to be corrected. He paced the 6x8 concrete box of the Federal Correctional Institution in Sheridan, convinced that Arthur Sterling would call, or that a high-priced lawyer would find a loophole, or that Catherine would simply wake up from this vengeance trip and realize she still needed him. But the phone didn't ring. The loophole didn't exist. And Catherine was gone. By year 3, the Richard Holloway, who wore Italian wool and drank single-malt scotch, was dead. In his place was inmate 89402, a man who hoarded packets of instant coffee like gold bars and knew exactly where to sit in the cafeteria to avoid getting shanked. He learned the currency of prison wasn't money, it was respect, and he had none. He was a suit, a white-collar thief who stole from the working man's pension. He was lower than the drug dealers. He was prey. The physical toll was rapid. The stress turned his hair from a distinguished salt and pepper to a dull, patchy white. He lost 30 pounds, his skin hanging loose on a frame that used to be filled out by gym sessions and steak dinners. The truest break came in the winter of his 4th year. A guard, a young man with a cruel jawline, tossed a letter onto his bunk during mail call. It was a single sheet of heavy cream-coloured cardstock, a funeral programme. In loving memory of Martha Holloway. 1948, 2029. Beloved mother and grandmother. Richard stared at the photo of his mother. It was recent. She looked happy, sitting in a garden he didn't recognise, a blanket over her lap. He hadn't spoken to her in 4 years. Catherine had moved her, changed her number, and intercepted every letter Richard tried to send. He flipped the program over. There was a handwritten note on the back, not in his mother's shaky script, but in Catherine's elegant, razor-sharp cursive. She passed peacefully in her sleep, Rick. She held my hand at the end. She told me to tell you she loved you, and that she hoped your top-secret government work in Asia was going well. I didn't have the heart to tell her her son was a felon. I paid for the oak casket. You're welcome. Richard collapsed onto the thin, stained mattress. He didn't scream. He simply curled into a ball, his knees pressing into his chest, and let out a sound that was less like a sob and more like something breaking deep inside a machine. She had stolen his goodbye. She had curated his mother's death just as she had curated his destruction. It was absolute. Release day came 4 years later, on a Tuesday in November that smelled of wet asphalt and diesel. There was no limo waiting. There was no friend with a clap on the back. Just a corrections officer handing him a plastic bag containing his personal effects. A wallet with an expired driver's license, a watch that had stopped ticking years ago, and $40 in cash. "Good luck, Holloway," the guard sneered. "See you in 6 months." Richard stepped out the heavy metal gates and onto the public bus. He sat in the back, pressing his forehead against the cold glass. He was 53 years old. He had a criminal record that flagged him as a high-risk fraudster. He had 0 assets. He returned to Seattle, but the city he remembered, the playground of glass towers and waterfront restaurants, rejected him like a mismatched organ. He applied for jobs in logistics. Rejected. He applied for jobs in data entry. Rejected. He applied to be a night manager at a 7-Eleven. Rejected. "Mr. Holloway," a 20-something manager at a shipping depot told him, barely looking up from his tablet, "Our insurance policy doesn't cover employees with federal convictions for embezzlement. We can't even let you drive a forklift." He ended up in a studio apartment in a crumbling building near the airport, paid for by a state voucher. The walls were paper-thin, vibrating with the sounds of his neighbors' arguments and the constant roar of jets overhead. His furniture consisted of a mattress he found on the curb and a milk crate he used as a table. He found work eventually, not as a VP, not as a manager, but as a phantom. The Bellevue Athletic Club was one of the most exclusive gyms in the state. Membership cost $3,000 a month. It was the kind of place Richard used to frequent, closing deals in the steam room or discussing mergers on the squash court. Now, he was the night janitor. His shift started at 10 p.m. and ended at 6 a.m. He wore a grey jumpsuit that was 2 sizes too big. His name tag simply read, Rick. He spent his nights scrubbing the sweat of millionaires off leather equipment, unclogging drains filled with expensive conditioner, and polishing the marble floors until they shone like mirrors. It was a special kind of torture. Every night, he walked past men he used to know. He saw familiar faces, bankers, lawyers, tech moguls, men he had once bought drinks for. He would stiffen, terrified of recognition, but he soon realized he had nothing to fear. They didn't see him. To them, he was part of the machinery of the building. He was the hand that replaced the towels. He was invisible. 6 months into the job, the club manager, a frantic little man named Mr. Henderson, intercepted Richard near the mop closet. "Rick, fix your collar. We're short-staffed for the gala tonight. I need you on the floor." "The floor?" Richard's voice was raspy from disuse. "Sir, I'm the janitor. I don't do service." "You do what I tell you to do if you want to keep this job," Henderson snapped. "Put on a vest. Grab a bussing tray. It's the Phoenix Gala. Big donors. Hundreds of thousands in the room. Your job is to make dirty glasses disappear. Do not speak to the guests. Do not make eye contact. You are a shadow." "Clear?" "Clear," Richard whispered. He dressed in the cheap polyester vest and black tie provided by the club. He looked in the cracked mirror of the employee locker room. The man staring back was hollow. His eyes were dull, rimmed with red. He looked like a ghost haunting his own life. The grand ballroom was a sensory overload. Crystal chandeliers dripped light onto tables laden with lobster, caviar, and champagne. A jazz band played soft, complex rhythms in the corner. The air smelled of expensive perfume and money. Richard moved through the crowd, head bowed, clutching his tray. He navigated the sea of tuxedos and silk gowns, snatching empty flutes and discarded napkins. "More champagne, darling?" A voice drifted past him. "Oh, absolutely. The market is rallying. We should celebrate." Richard flinched. He recognized the voice. It was Bill Dantry, a man Richard had played golf with every Saturday for 5 years. Bill was standing 3 feet away, laughing. Richard held his breath, turning his back, scrubbing a spot on the tablecloth that didn't exist. Bill didn't even glance at him. Richard retreated to the shadows near the service entrance, his heart hammering against his ribs. He just wanted the night to end. He wanted to go back to his milk crate and the sound of airplanes. "Ladies and gentlemen," the MC's voice boomed over the high-fidelity speakers, silencing the room. "Please take your seats. Tonight is a special night. Tonight we honor the visionary behind the Phoenix Foundation. A woman who rose from the ashes of personal betrayal to build an empire of philanthropy and ethical business." The lights dimmed. A spotlight cut through the darkness, illuminating the center stage. "Please welcome the CEO of Horizon Logistics and our Woman of the Year, Catherine Stone." The tray slipped from Richard's hand. He caught it just before it hit the floor, the glass stems clattering dangerously. Horizon Logistics. That was the company that bought out his old firm after the scandal, the company that had stripped his assets. And Stone. She had gone back to her maiden name. Catherine stepped into the spotlight. She was breathtaking. She wore a gown of midnight blue velvet that hugged her figure, displaying a confidence Richard had never seen when they were married. She looked younger, sharper. The weight of his lies was gone, and in its place was a terrifying luminosity. The applause was thunderous. Men stood up. Women cheered. She owned the room. She approached the microphone, her smile gracious but steely. "Thank you," she said, her voice echoing with that familiar warmth, but now laced with power. 5 years ago, my life was dismantled. I found myself married to a lie. I had a choice, collapse or build something new. I chose to build. She paused, looking out over the adoring crowd. "I learned that true success isn't about how much you can take," she continued, "but how much you can give back, and how effectively you can clean up the mess left by others." Laughter rippled through the room, a polite, knowing laughter. "I want to thank my team," she said, gesturing to a table near the front. "And I want to thank my partner, not just in business but in life, the man who stood by me when the storm hit. Arthur." Richard felt the blood drain from his extremities. Arthur Sterling stood up from the front table. His old boss, the man who fired him, the man who testified against him. Arthur walked up the steps to the stage. He took Catherine's hand and kissed it. He whispered something in her ear that made her laugh, a genuine, intimate laugh that Richard hadn't heard in a decade. The puzzle pieces slammed together in Richard's mind with the force of a physical blow. It wasn't just revenge, it was a coup. Arthur hadn't just fired Richard, he had colluded with Catherine. They had ousted him, taken his shares, rebranded the company, and built a life together on the ruins of Richard's existence. They had been together the whole time. The late nights at the office Richard thought he was getting away with? Catherine was likely having late nights of her own with Arthur. He had been playing checkers while they were playing 4D chess. The speech ended. The music swelled. The crowd began to mingle again. Catherine and Arthur descended the stairs, arm in arm, heading toward the VIP bar, heading straight toward Richard. Richard couldn't move. His feet were nailed to the floor. Panic rose in his throat like bile. He wanted to run, but there was nowhere to go. They were 10 feet away. 5. Catherine stopped. She was so close Richard could smell her perfume. No longer vanilla. It was something sharper now. Sandalwood and ice. She turned to Arthur, adjusting his tie. "I'll get a water, darling." She turned to the service station. She looked directly at Richard. Time stopped. Richard stood there in his ill-fitting polyester vest, holding a tray of dirty glasses, his grey hair unkempt, his face lined with the misery of the last 8 years. He looked into the eyes of the woman he had vowed to love, the woman he had betrayed, the woman who had surgically removed him from the world. "Kate," he breathed, the word barely a whisper. He expected shock. He expected a smirk of triumph. He expected her to recoil. But Catherine's expression didn't change. Her eyes swept over him, over his face, his name tag, his trembling hands. There was no recognition, no spark of anger, no flicker of history. To her he was just a texture in the background, a prop. She placed her empty champagne glass onto his tray. "Clear this, please," she said, her tone polite, indifferent, and utterly dismissive. She turned her back on him before he could answer. She took Arthur's arm, and they walked away into the golden light of the ballroom, laughing about their upcoming trip to the Amalfi Coast. Richard stood there, the weight of the dirty glass heavy on his tray. She hadn't killed him. That would have been too kind. She had done something far worse. She had forgotten him. He was the dust she had swept out the door, and she never looked at the dustpan. "Hey, Rick!" The manager, Henderson, hissed in his ear, grabbing his elbow. "What are you doing standing there staring? Move! Table 4 is a mess!" Richard blinked, the golden light blurring through the tears he refused to shed. He looked at the retreating figures of Catherine and Arthur, the rulers of the world he was expelled from. "Yes, sir," Richard whispered. "Right away." He turned, bowed his head, and carried the garbage back to the kitchen, the doors swinging shut behind him, cutting off the music, the laughter, and the light, leaving him in the silence of the scullery where he belonged. Richard Halloway spent his life believing he was the protagonist, the man who could manipulate the world without consequence. But he forgot the oldest rule of drama. The higher the pedestal, the harder the fall. Catherine didn't just divorce him. She erased him. She took his past, his future, and even his memory, leaving him to scrub the floors of the paradise he lost. It's a brutal reminder that sometimes the best revenge isn't a scream or a fight. It's silence. It's living so well that the person who hurt you becomes nothing more than a stranger holding a tray of dirty glasses. What do you think? Was Catherine's punishment justice, or was it cruel? And did you catch the hint about Arthur Sterling earlier in the story? Let me know in the comments. I love reading your theories. If this story sent a chill down your spine, please hit that like button, subscribe, and share this video with someone who loves a good twist. Until next time, be careful who you betray.